Hello there, my name's Mark Whitaker. I'm a Christadelphian who lives near Stratford-upon-Avon. I don't know anything about Shakespeare, I'm afraid, but I have been reading my Bible since I was a child. And so I'm going to be sharing with you in this presentation something of what the Bible teaches about how God reveals himself through other beings. Now, this is a Gospel Online presentation, and if you want to hear more about the truth of the Gospel that the Christadelphians are teaching, then please, by all means, subscribe to either our YouTube channel or follow our Facebook page, Gospel Online UK. So, what's this presentation all about? Well, it starts really with us asking some questions to try and deal with what might appear at first sight to be some contradictions that we come across in the Bible as we read through it. And the particular contradiction that appears before us on first reading of the Bible is around this question: can anyone see God? You see, what we have are some passages that have a very clear message, like, for example, when God speaks to Moses in Exodus chapter 33, he says to Moses, "You cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live." And actually, the New Testament has exactly the same message. In 1 John chapter 4, the Apostle John writes, "No one has seen God at any time." So we've got that sort of statement on the one hand. Nobody is able to or has seen God. And yet there are other places in the Bible where we seem to have the opposite sort of message, because in the very same book that we were reading a minute ago, the book of Exodus, we actually read in chapter 24 of an occasion where, for the elders of Israel who were with Moses, it says they saw the God of Israel. And it says a verse later, so they saw God and ate and drank. That's interesting, isn't it? And similarly, a little bit further on, still in that period where Israel are going through the desert towards the promised land, God talks about his interactions with Moses. And he says of Moses, "I speak with him face to face." That very much gives the impression, doesn't it, of God actually talking visibly to Moses face to face, as we might talk to one another. And then later on in the Bible, you get a number of passages like this one that we have in the prophet Isaiah, where Isaiah records, "In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple." So Isaiah saw something that seemed to be God sitting on a throne. So we appear to have, between these different sort of passages, what might be a contradiction. So the question is, well, are we really having something there within the Bible where it contradicts itself? Now, the simple answer to that is no. This isn't the Bible contradicting itself. What we're actually seeing here in these different passages are that there are different ways in which God reveals himself to men and women. And that's what we see through the pages of the Bible. And we're going to explore that a little bit more now to help you understand this better. Maybe we should start then by going to a verse in the New Testament. It's the letter to the Hebrews. And it starts with these words. It says, "God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets." So straight away, that letter opens by saying, look, in different times, different centuries, God spoke to people and revealed himself to them in various ways. And that's really what we're thinking about when we ask this question, well, how exactly does God reveal himself? Can people see God or can they not? So how does God then reveal himself and reveal his message? Well, there are some very straightforward ways in which God communicates with men and women and reveals himself. The most obvious of those, I guess, is that God just speaks to people. And we've got lots and lots of examples like this one, just taken from the prophet Jeremiah, where he says at the beginning of chapter 2, "Moreover, the word of the Lord came to me, saying," and there we are, the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah. However God spoke to him, Jeremiah heard words from God, and Jeremiah records them and he speaks them to others. That's one of the ways in which God reveals himself, just through a spoken word. Sometimes, though, God reveals himself and his message through visions. So, for example, one of the later prophets, Daniel, records in chapter 8, he says, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that appeared to me the first time. So this wasn't the first vision, nor was it the last that Daniel would see. So sometimes God gets his message over through visions, and sometimes through dreams as well. And dreams and visions aren't that different from each other. These are all ways in which God reveals himself by speaking or showing some kind of picture to people. But none of those are actually God physically having an appearance, are they? So that people see something that they say, oh, this is God. So we then might say, well, okay, how then, if at all, does God reveal himself in a physical presence to men and women? Because remember, we've already seen back there in the first verse we looked at in Exodus that God says, no man shall see me and live. And actually, that's not the only issue we might have with the idea of seeing a physical representation of God. Because later on in the Old Testament, King Solomon, when he's just built a temple for God, says these words. He says in 1 Kings chapter 8, but will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain you. How much less this temple which I have built? So you've got another challenge there, haven't you, really? You know, how can God physically reveal himself to people so that they see something and go, oh, that's God, if God actually fills the universe? And actually, if we can't see God and live anyway, how can it be that there could be something that we could see? Well, here's one of the answers, that God reveals himself through other beings. And the main way in which we find this to be the case when we're reading through our Bibles is quite simply that God reveals himself to others through the angels. Now, angels, created by God, the word angel in both the Old and the New Testament simply means a messenger. And that's what angels are. They are God's ambassadors from God to men and women. It's angels who very often deliver God's message to mankind, and therefore it's the angels who appear and who speak on God's behalf. That's how God reveals himself, and there's lots and lots of examples of this. Let's have a look at a couple that we come across in the book of Judges. So in the book of Judges in the Old Testament, in chapter 2, we read there, then the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I led you up from Egypt and brought you to the land of which I swore to your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down their altars, but you've not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? So here we are. This is an angel, and he's appearing physically. He comes from one place to another, walking along the way, physical appearance there, and he speaks to the people, but he speaks as God on God's behalf and tells them what God had said to them and things that God had promised years before. So the angel speaks for God on God's behalf. And similarly, just a few chapters later, we read about an appearance of an angel to one of the later judges, a man called Gideon. And we read there, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. So you see there, Gideon sees a physical appearance. He sees the angel there before him, but the angel brings to him a message from God, speaking as God's representative. The Lord is with you, he says. And you might notice there that and if we read on, actually, we'd see that Gideon isn't massively fazed by this angel appearing to him, because in actual fact, the angel just seems to have looked like a man, to Gideon, just as the previous angel we read about probably looked like a man speaking God's message. And very often angels, when they appear in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, are mistaken for being men. Here's an example in Genesis chapter 18, where it says, "Then the Lord appeared to Abraham by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground." This was the Lord appearing to Abraham, but what Abraham actually saw, as far as he was concerned, were 3 men. And later on, we're told that one of those 3 is the angel of the Lord, and the other 2 are angels with him. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, at the end of the letter to the Hebrews, the writer picks up on this occasion and says to early Christians, "Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels." And he's thinking back to Abraham doing exactly that, and to others who spoke to angels and provided food for them without realizing that they were angels. Actually, the fact that angels look like men so often when they appear in the Bible goes right back to the creation record in Genesis chapter 1, because there in Genesis 1 verse 26, God says to the angels during creation, God says, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness." So in some way then, man and woman are made in the image of God and his angels. So it's not surprising then, is it, that when men and women meet angels, they think that they're just meeting men. We could say, actually, it's not so much that angels look like men, but that rather that mankind have a resemblance to the angels of God. What you may have noticed in some of these verses that we've had a look at, and the one that's still on the screen there, is that when angels appear, angels both appear and speak as God himself. They don't just come along and say, "Well, God says this." They speak as if they are God. They say, "I, the Lord, say this." Here's a really good example that we have at the beginning of the book of Exodus, where Moses comes face to face with an angel at the burning bush. And look at what we read in Exodus chapter 3. "The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. Then Moses said, 'I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn.' So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, 'Moses, Moses.' Moreover, he said, 'I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.' And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God." Did you see how there the angel of the Lord and God are all interchangeable, aren't they? It's the angel who's appearing, but the angel speaks and appears as God himself, and therefore he uses God's name. And that's something that we see repeated on many occasions. Just as we go on through the book of Exodus, we can appreciate this kind of interchangeability. So, for example, in Exodus 23, God says to Moses, "Behold, I send an angel before you to keep you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him and obey his voice. Do not provoke him, for he'll not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him." So God says that my angel will go before you. He carries my name. He will speak as me. And sure enough, that's what happens. But later on, 10 chapters later, God says to Moses on this occasion, "My presence will go with you and I will give you rest." So actually the angel leading the people towards the promised land is the very same thing as God's presence going with them. There's a great interchangeability there. And really that explains for us, doesn't it, this apparent contradiction that we see at first glance as we read through the Bible, because what we're actually seeing is that when people see God, and we read like we saw that the elders of Israel saw the God of Israel, what they're actually seeing on those sort of occasions is the angel who represents God, what is very often described as the angel of the Lord, because that angel is actually given God's name, and he carries not just God's name but also God's authority. These sorts of angels, they're using God's power, which is the Holy Spirit. And this isn't something that mysterious. It wasn't a secret that the people who had those sort of experiences didn't really understand. Quite the contrary, actually. It seems as we read through the Old Testament that those men and women who interacted with angels who spoke as if they were God, that those men and women actually understood that was the case. Here's just one example of this. The man Jacob, one of the forefathers of the nation of Israel, as Jacob was growing old and about to die, he blessed his son Joseph and Joseph's sons. And look at what we read in Genesis 48. It says, Jacob blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has fed me all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. So you see, Jacob recognized that the God who looked after him was revealed to him through the angel who actually Jacob on occasions came face to face with in his own experience. So this is one of the ways then that the Bible reveals that God reveals himself to us through other beings. He reveals himself through the angels. They take God's name and they show God's power and authority. I hope that's been understandable so far. If you want to make a comment at this point, please do so by all means. But how else, if at all, does God reveal his character and his presence through others? Well, there is another way that God reveals himself that's shown to us, and it's through his Son, Jesus Christ. If we carried on reading the verse from Hebrews that I showed you earlier on, this is what we would have read. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom he also made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person. That's a really interesting phrase there at the end, that the writer of Hebrews says, God has spoken to us now through his Son Jesus, who's the express image of his person. And that express image phrase means that Jesus is like a wax imprint of his Father's stamp. The image there is like the perfect mirror image that a stamp makes when you press it into wax. And that's telling us something really important, and that we see expanded on through the New Testament, that for you and me to know Jesus is to know God himself. Because when we see what Jesus is like, and we've got lots of that in the New Testament, we actually get to know better what God himself is like. So even though we can't see God physically, remember, no man can see me and live, yet at the same time, when we see Jesus and we see the characteristics that Jesus exhibit, we're getting a very, very good impression indeed of what God himself is like. And that's something that Jesus himself is at pains to point out. Look at these words of Jesus in John's Gospel at the Last Supper. Jesus, talking to his 12 apostles, says to them, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. And from now on, you know him and have seen him. Philip said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and yet you've not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, show us the Father? There's nothing mysterious in the words of Jesus there. Jesus is saying to Philip, look, and look at the point he makes at the beginning of this set of verses. He says, if you know me, actually you know my Father. If you've seen me, therefore, you've actually seen God, because you know what God is like. It's not necessary for you and me to know physically what God might look like. If we want to look into the character of God, though, and understand the kind of creator we have, well, there's no better thing we can do than to look at Jesus, because as Jesus says, he who has seen me has seen the Father. And that point is made in different ways in the New Testament, and particularly by John. So, for example, in John chapter 1, the gospel writer says, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who's in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. Yes, Jesus has shown to us what God is like, even though none of us have seen God. Or Jesus himself says later on in John's gospel, Jesus answered and said to them, most assuredly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he sees the Father do. For whatever he does, the Son also does in like manner. And it's like the little picture I've put there, that the Son imitates his Father. He's doing exactly the same as his Father does. So all the actions of Jesus that we have recorded for us, all the works of Jesus, the way that Jesus speaks, well, all of those are a really good indication to me and you as to what his Father is like. And that's what God wanted. God sent Jesus to reveal himself to us through his own Son. And God rewarded his Son for the perfect obedience to God's will that Jesus showed. In fact, it's in the letter to the Philippians that the Apostle Paul writes this of Jesus. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow, of those in heaven and those on earth and of those under the earth, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. There we are. Jesus has been given this wonderful exaltation now by God. He now is Lord because of his obedience to his Father, and because he so perfectly reflected his Father's character. Now, I have to say, it's not completely clear within those couple of verses as to just exactly what this exaltation of Jesus means in truth, but it is made clearer elsewhere. And one of the things that is made clear is that Jesus now shares God's nature. It's not just that he's like God in character, he's now like God in nature as well. So, for example, at the beginning of the book of Revelation, Jesus appears in John's vision and says, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am he who lives and was dead. And behold, I am alive forevermore. Yes, Jesus now is no longer a mortal man like we are. Jesus lives forever like God does. And the same point is made just in passing in the letter to the Hebrews. It says, he, Jesus, because he continues forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. Yes, Jesus is alive forever. He's not going to die again because he's now like God in nature. And Peter, in his letter, talks about the position Jesus now has when he says, Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God, angels and authorities and powers having been made subject to him. Yes, Jesus not only behaves like God and has the nature of God, but he also now has the authority of God. He sits at God's right hand and is above all the angels and is able to exercise authority just like God himself does. So there we are then. God has been revealing himself through others all through history. First of all, through all those pages of the Old Testament, God in many occasions has revealed himself through the angels. But when his son is born, Jesus Christ, God then begins to reveal himself through a man, through his own son, Jesus. And there's a final way as well in which God can reveal himself through others. And that's the possibility that God can reveal himself through those men and women who follow Jesus. You see, quite simply, if you and I become disciples of Jesus and try to follow Jesus, then if we follow the example that Jesus set in his own life, well, by doing that, we're also reflecting the character of God himself, because Jesus perfectly reflected the character of God. And in that way, it's actually possible for the God of the universe, the creator, to reveal himself to other men and women through you and through me. It's actually a point that John makes when he writes his first letter. He says, "Beloved, if God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has seen God at any time. If we love one another, God abides in us, and his love has been perfected in us." So there we are. John's talking about one of the wonderful characteristics of God, his love. And he says, well, this is what, if this is the love God has shown for us, well, because Jesus showed the same love, then we try to imitate that in our lives. We love one another. And it doesn't actually matter that no one has actually ever seen God, because if we love one another, then actually people are experiencing God's character, his characteristic of love through us. His love is perfected in us. So it is actually possible for others to see not just the love of God, but other characteristics of God as well, through men and women who imitate God, which could be us. And if you and I seek to do that, if we follow Jesus and we try to be imitators of God in this way, well, that there's a promise made to us for the future. Here's how Peter, in his second letter, describes the promise which God sets before us. He says of God that his divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, through the knowledge of him who called us by glory and virtue, by which have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises, that through these you may be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. Now, quite a complicated set of verses there, but the point I've highlighted that Peter's bringing home to early Christians, to disciples of Jesus, is this: that just like Jesus, who by revealing God in his perfect life, by reflecting the character of God, was then given the divine nature, immortality that only God himself possesses, well, so you and I too, if we try to follow Jesus and put our faith and trust in him, well, the promise is there for us too, that one day we also will have the divine nature, that we will be made like God, like Jesus is now. We'll be given and granted immortality so that we can share that nature with God forever. So in conclusion then, what have we seen? Well, we've seen that although no man can see God, nevertheless, God has revealed himself through the ages, through other beings. He's revealed himself through the angels. He's revealed himself even more fully through his son, Jesus Christ, because through Jesus, we've been able to see exactly what God is like in character. But also, God can be revealed today through you and through me, and not just today. But if we become disciples of Jesus, there's the prospect held out for us that we will be a revelation of God, his whole nature, forever in the future. And I hope that's a hope that you would like to have in your own life today. Thank you for watching the presentation, and I would encourage you to stick with the Gospel Online on Facebook or on YouTube, and subscribe and watch the other videos in the series that we have. Thank you very much.